First says, "Only my touch keeps her alive." Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The crash came fast. 1 second, Byron Maddox was flying a solo delivery run over an uncharted sector, and the next, his console exploded in a shower of sparks as a proximity mine tore through his right wing. His modified courier ship, the Iron Nomad, spun out, alarms wailing, cockpit lights strobing red across his face. He barely had time to fire the emergency descent thrusters before the ground, if you could call it that, rushed up and swallowed him. The next thing he knew, he was upside down, strapped into his seat, half frozen inside a shattered cockpit surrounded by nothing but white. Snow and silence. Icy winds whipped across the broken fuselage, slicing through his gear like it wasn't even rated for cold. Whatever this place was, it wasn't on any official chart, and it sure as hell wasn't meant for humans. He dragged himself from the wreckage, one arm cradled against his ribs, pain blooming with every breath. Blood darkened his sleeve, but it was the biting cold that worried him more. The wind cut like knives and his boots were already freezing to the ground. He stumbled toward the only thing on the horizon, a jagged opening in a cliff face that emitted faint mist, like breath in winter. No time to think. He moved. The cave swallowed him with a sudden warmth that nearly buckled his knees. Not real warmth, just a reprieve. Thermal vents, maybe. He pressed deeper, deeper still, until the shrieking wind faded behind crystalline walls of ice and the silence of the cavern settled around him like a shroud. That's when he saw her. She moved from the shadows without a sound, towering and still, her body wrapped in snow-white fur that shimmered like diamond dust under the glowing pillars of icicles that hung from the ceiling. Her limbs were powerful and graceful, more beast than woman at first glance, but her face told another story. Blue lips parted with a soft breath, eyes glowing with a pale crystal hue locked onto his. She was trembling. Not with fear, but with cold. She looked like a statue carved from winter itself, barely standing, her breath visible in thick clouds. Then she spoke, "Don't move, I need your fire." He blinked, unsure if the words were real or if he was already hallucinating from the cold, but then she stepped closer, hesitant, cautious, almost reverent. Her large hands didn't grip him at first. She hovered over him like she feared he'd break. Then when he didn't run, she pressed herself against him, arms sliding around his chest, cheek to his neck. Her body was freezing, so cold it burned, but she sighed like she'd touched heaven. "You're warm," she murmured, almost crying. He should have shoved her off, should have pulled a weapon, but her touch wasn't threatening. It was desperate, and there was no mistaking the way her strength sagged the moment she clung to him, as if whatever was keeping her alive was slipping away. Her weight pulled him to the icy floor. He grunted, more from surprise than discomfort, and found himself cradling a being that shouldn't exist, half frozen, half feral, but clearly alive. "What are you?" he managed through chattering teeth, trying not to flinch at the intense cold leaching into his chest. "I was left here," she whispered, barely audible, eyes closed. "I can't survive long without heat. You're the first human I've seen in years." Byron didn't answer right away. His survival instincts were screaming, but they weren't clear on whether she was the threat or the salvation. Her body was still trembling against him, and he realized something vital. She wasn't just using him. She was dying. "I need to stay close to your core temperature," she added, voice raw, "just for a while." He exhaled a cloud of fog between them. "Then don't waste it talking." She smiled, faint but real, then went quiet. They sat like that for a long time, her arms locked around his torso, his hands slowly thawing against the curve of her back, first softer than he expected, thick with frost. Around them, the cavern walls gleamed with refracted light from natural vents hidden in the mist. It was a place of silent beauty and deadly cold. As sensation returned to his fingers, he allowed himself to process. She was strong, easily twice his mass, with proportions more animal than woman, but she wasn't savage. Everything about her body language screamed control, restraint, pain. She wasn't clinging to him for dominance or power. She was clinging to survive. "Name," he asked eventually. Her glowing eyes opened confused. "Name." "Yes, I'm Byron. You got a name?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Bianca." "Bianca," he repeated. "Pretty ironic considering your whole Ice Queen look." "Irony, that's human." "Yeah, well, so am I mostly." She let out something that might have been a laugh or maybe a choked sob. Either way, she didn't let go. Her breathing was calmer now, slower. The tremors had dulled. She was stabilizing. He could feel the chill radiating off her, slowly lessening, like she was absorbing his heat at a molecular level. "How long have you been down here?" She didn't answer immediately. "Since they left me, since the others died since, I became the last." His brow furrowed. "Others?" "Frostborn," she said, eyes distant. "We were designed for this place, but not for solitude." He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. She'd been made, abandoned, and left to die in a prison of ice. Maybe she was dangerous. Maybe he should have left her there. But as her head rested against his chest, the silence returned. And this time it didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Outside, the wind held again, angry and sharp. Inside, she whispered, "Don't let go yet." He didn't, and somewhere deep in the ice, something else stirred, watching. Byron didn't sleep that night. Not because he didn't want to, his body was aching. His ribs throbbed with every breath, and the crash had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. But because Bianca never let go, she clung to him like her life depended on it, and from the way her temperature slowly stabilized over the hours, he suspected it really did. Her body, once cold enough to numb his skin, now felt just shy of tolerable, like curling up next to a bag of half-melted snow. He tried not to think too hard about the fact that this beast woman, tall, fur-covered, glowing-eyed, had found comfort in him, a bruised and barely functioning merc with more enemies than friends. What the hell kind of universe stranded someone like her in a place like this? The thought kept looping in his head as the glow of the ice pillars shifted subtly, mimicking the rise of a false dawn. There was no sun here, just geothermal rhythms and ancient machines, still pumping out faint light from deep within the frozen moon's crust. When Bianca finally stirred, her arms loosened, not in rejection but in relief. She blinked, eyes pulsing with that same eerie blue glow, and sat back just enough to study him. He didn't flinch this time. Her gaze wasn't predatory. It was exhausted, grateful, like she didn't expect him to still be there. "I didn't think you stay." Byron scoffed, slowly sitting upright. "Didn't have much choice, did I? You're heavier than you look." She looked almost guilty. "I didn't mean to burden you." He waved it off, stretching his arms and checking the bandage he'd wrapped around his side. "I've had worse. Back when I ran with the Tarvo's crew, I once got pinned under a collapsing transport crate for 16 hours. You're a lot easier on the ribs." That earned the faintest smile, one that faded quickly when she looked toward the deeper part of the cavern. "This place isn't safe." "Yeah, I figured. Your hole don't move or I'll die." Speech kind of gave it away. She stood slowly, rising to her full height. Her body was covered in white fur that shimmered slightly under the faint bioluminescent glow of the surrounding icicles. The curves of her form were less bestial now that he wasn't half frozen, more humanoid than he'd expected, though clearly engineered for harsh environments. Her feet were digitigrade, padded and clawed for traction on ice, and her posture betrayed a warrior's grace. She wasn't just built for survival, she was built for war. "You need to understand," she said quietly, walking toward a narrow tunnel flanked by sheets of rippling ice. "Something hunts this cavern. It's why I stayed so close to the thermal veins. It can't survive the heat, but it's always circling." Byron followed, scanning the environment with a soldier's eye. "Let me guess. Big, fast, and doesn't care much for introductions." She nodded. "It was the first test subject. They couldn't control it when the rest of my kind were abandoned. It remained." "And what? Now it's guarding the place? Cleaning up loose ends?" Her jaw clenched. I think it just wants us gone or dead." The way she said it made it clear which option the creature preferred. Byron glanced behind him, nodding how the faint mist that hung in the air seemed to move differently when stirred by wind versus breath. There were patterns here, trails of motion, evidence of movement far deeper than where they stood. He'd seen enough battlefield terrain to recognize when he was in enemy territory. Whatever was stalking these caves didn't want them resting for long. "All right," he said, adjusting the strap on his gear pack and grabbing what was left of his emergency rations. "Then we don't stay long. We find your way out, a ship, a signal, something." Bianca looked at him like he'd suggested reaching the stars with a rope and a grappling hook. "There is no way out, not unless you brought a backup transport buried under all that wreckage." "I didn't, but I've got a locator beacon, short range, but if we can get to higher ground or find a relay, we might get a ping to someone." She hesitated. "The relay is in the research vault, deep beneath the ice, but that's where it nests." "Of course it is," he muttered, "because nothing's ever easy." Still he didn't back away. That made her tilt her head slightly, studying him with unreadable emotion. "You're not like the others." "What others?" "The ones who came before, the ones who ran, the ones who tried to kill me when they realized what I was." Byron shrugged. "I've met monsters in my line of work, Bianca. You're not one of them." Her eyes widened a little. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You saved my ass last night. You could have let me freeze, stripped me for parts, or dragged me off to some horror show nest. You didn't. That counts for something." She looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. He recognized the reaction. He'd seen it in soldiers who didn't believe they deserved survival, people who had lost too much to trust the future. "I'll lead you to the vault," she said eventually, "but I can't promise you'll survive the trek. Then we make a deal. I help you get what you need, heat, safety, whatever. Then you help me get that beacon working. After that, we decide if we go our own ways or not." Bianca paused, then gave a short nod. "Fair." As they moved deeper into the cavern network, the walls grew more jagged, streaked with frozen minerals that shimmered under ambient glow. Bianca walked ahead, every step deliberate, her clawed feet gripping the slick surface like second nature. Byron followed close behind, trying not to show how every breath still burned his lungs and how the cold still knotted his bones. He watched her movements, the way she paused at certain echoes, the way her ears twitched at distant vibrations. She was attuned to this place in a way no human could be. They reached a plateau that overlooked a massive fissure, glowing faintly from geothermal light below. Bianca knelt and pointed to a long path of stepped ice ridges leading down to a blackened structure half buried in frost. "That's the vault. The signal tower's inside. But once we step on that path, the Guardian will know." Byron stared into the depths, jaw tight. "Then we better move fast before it gets hungry." She looked at him, not blinking, and said quietly, "It's always hungry." And with that, they descended together into the frozen heart of danger side by side. The descent was brutal. Each step down the icy ridges felt like a test of endurance, both physical and mental, as Byron placed his boots on slick platforms that threatened to send him tumbling into the glowing abyss below. The ice walls surrounding them pulsed faintly, like the very moon had a heartbeat. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became, just enough to keep the cold from killing him outright. Bianca moved with practiced grace, always a few steps ahead, guiding him without speaking, her body alert and eyes constantly scanning the shadows. Byron noticed how her movements changed the closer they got to the vault, more precise, more defensive. The confident strength she had earlier was now tempered by something heavier, caution, perhaps even fear. He could see the vault clearly now, nestled in the cavern's lowest point. It was a massive structure of black alloy, half swallowed by time and frost. Lights flickered sporadically on its outer shell, signs that power still lingered within. Its jagged silhouette jutted out from the surrounding ice like a scar. The Syndicate had built it to last and likely to be forgotten. As they approached, the air shifted, no longer just cold. It felt thick, heavier than it should have been. Something in the pressure made the hairs on his neck rise. Bianca stopped suddenly, motioning for him to stay low. Byron crouched beside her, adjusting the rifle he'd salvaged from the wreck, and followed her gaze toward the edge of the main entryway. A shadow moved, slow, deliberate, massive. It was hard to make out at first. The creature blended with the environment, its body cloaked in refractive scales that mirrored the surrounding ice. As it crept along the edges of the vault, its long limbs barely made a sound. Then it turned, and Byron caught a glimpse of the thing's eyes, glowing a sickly orange, full of primal hunger. It was taller than Bianca by at least 2 heads, all sinew and jagged bone, with a hunched back and clawed arms that scraped the ice with each stride. Its head was elongated, almost insect-like, with a maw that split in 3 directions. It wasn't a beast. It was a weapon, a biological sentinel engineered to patrol and eliminate. Bianca's voice was barely a whisper. It doesn't see like we do, it tracks heat and vibration. Byron didn't move. His grip tightened on his rifle. Can it smell? No, but if we make a sound or get too warm, it'll know. Perfect, he muttered. So we just tiptoe past a heat-seeking murder machine through an ancient death trap. Easy day. She glanced at him, something flickering behind her eyes. You joke too much. It's how I keep from losing it. She didn't reply, but he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Together, they crept forward along the outer ledge of the vault's main hull. Every footstep was deliberate, every breath measured. The Guardian moved along a patrol loop, tracing the perimeter like it had done it 1,000 times. Byron followed Bianca's lead, his body screaming with tension as they ducked into a recessed maintenance hatch, barely large enough for both of them. Once inside, he exhaled slowly, letting his back press against the cold wall. Bianca remained close, her breathing calm but shallow. We're not safe yet. It knows these tunnels. Byron checked the internal schematic on the ancient access panel beside them. The interface flickered, then responded. Power grid still active. Looks like this vault had multiple redundancies, thermal, solar, and geothermal backups. If we can get to the command core, I can boost the beacon signal. That room is near the center, she said, her voice tightening. That's also where the cryopods were kept. He looked up. You said others were here. They died. Some weren't stable. Others fought the Guardian and lost. She looked away for a moment, her voice low. I buried who I could. The rest were reclaimed by the cold. Byron didn't push. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of ghosts. Everyone who made it this far in life did. Instead, he started moving down the narrow hallway, Bianca close behind their footsteps, muffled by ice-frosted metal. The corridors twisted in strange angles, distorted by years of structural shifts. The air was warmer here, unnaturally so. Condensation dripped from pipes above, evaporating on the floor with quiet hisses. Every sound was a risk. As they entered what looked like a control substation, a flicker of movement flashed across the far end of the hall. Byron raised his rifle, but Bianca stopped him, grabbing his arm. It's not the Guardian. Another figure stepped into view, slumped, dragging one leg. For a split second, Byron thought it was human. Then it turned its head, and he saw what remained of its face. Pale, half-rotted flesh clung to a cracked skull, and glowing blue eyes flickered like dying lanterns. The thing opened its mouth, emitting a distorted sound that echoed down the corridor like a broken recording. Frostborn Bianca whispered, one of the failed ones still alive or something like it. The creature shambled toward them, slow but deliberate. Bianca moved in front of Byron without hesitation. Let me handle this. He didn't argue. She stepped forward, arms out, palms open. You remember me, don't you? We trained together, Saras, that was your name. The thing paused, twitching. It tilted its head, emitting a low sound that almost resembled her name. Then it lunged. Bianca was faster. She caught it mid-stride, wrapping her arms around its torso and driving it into the wall with a sickening crunch. She held it there, murmuring something in a soft language Byron didn't understand. The creature shuddered, then went limp. She eased it down to the floor, cradling its head for a moment before closing its eyes. Byron watched, stunned. "You didn't kill it. It was already dead," she said quietly. "Just stuck." He wanted to say something, but the way she looked at the fallen Frostborn made it clear words wouldn't help. Instead, he crouched and examined the damaged ID tag still clinging to the creature's suit. The Syndicate symbol was still visible, half burned, half frozen. "They made you all like this?" he asked. "No," Bianca said. "They made us to serve. What we became was a side effect." Byron stood, eyes narrowing. "Then let's find that core. I've got a message to send and someone needs to know what happened down here." Bianca gave a single nod. For the first time, there was a glimmer of fire in her eyes. Together, they moved deeper into the vault, unaware that the Guardian had altered its patrol, now heading directly toward their path. The silence inside the vault wasn't natural. It wasn't the silence of emptiness or peace. It was the silence of places that had seen too much and chosen to forget. The farther Byron and Bianca moved into the heart of the facility, the more the walls seemed to close in, as though the structure itself resented being disturbed. Cracked lights buzzed above their heads, flickering with residual power drawn from long-neglected systems. Exposed wires hung like vines in the narrow halls, sparking quietly. Everything smelled faintly of metal, rot, and frost. Bianca led with purpose now, her gait sharper, more urgent. Her eyes scanned every corridor, every intersection. Byron could see the tension in her shoulders growing. This wasn't just a vault to her. It was a graveyard. As they turned into a wider atrium, he paused. The space opened into what looked like an observation deck, once encased in glass, now half collapsed and buried in ice. Below them, he could see several cryopods, most cracked, some shattered entirely. Inside, some of them were twisted remains of what might have once been humanoid forms, now long dead, frozen in positions of anguish or rage. Bianca stopped at the railing, her breath catching. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Byron understood the weight of what she was seeing. These were her people, her sisters, the rest of the Frostborn. He stepped beside her, not touching her, not offering comfort in words that would fall flat. He just stood with her, letting the quiet speak for them both. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "They never woke up. Some were malfunctioning before stasis. Others, they weren't stable. The scientists didn't care. We were just assets." Byron clenched his jaw, the fury rising in his gut slow and steady. "The Syndicate did this." She nodded. "They called it Project Thermes, a program designed to create frontline cold climate soldiers, living weapons for ice world conquest. We were meant to be bonded to handlers, human ones, emotional conditioning, shared temperature regulation intimacy. They wanted obedience through dependency." "And you?" he asked quietly. "I bonded too well," she said with a bitter smile. "I became unstable without heat. My prototype cycle was considered a failure. They called me too needy, too volatile, so they left me here to die with the rest." Byron looked down at the ruined pods again. "They turned you into a weapon, then punished you for being human." Her gaze shifted toward him, eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not human." "You're more human than half the people I've met," he muttered, then turned back toward the hallway ahead. "Come on, let's make sure the Syndicate doesn't get to cover this up." They moved through the control wing, passing through broken labs where frozen notes still clung to shattered screens, glass tubes filled with strange organic residues, and long-dead power cells flickering weakly. Byron checked the data pads scattered across desks, quickly scanning logs and files. Most were corrupted, but a few key reports were recoverable. One caught his eye. It was a progress log for Subject Alpha B13 Bianca. He read aloud, "Subject displays heightened emotional response to sustained contact, demonstrates elevated metabolic adaptation, when exposed to male subjects with high core temperature, recommends containment until bonding behaviors can be reprogrammed." Bianca flinched. "I remember that day. I thought I was dying. I was adapting." He met her eyes, voice firm. They tried to rewire you, but you're still here. You outlasted all of them." Before she could respond, a deep metallic groan echoed through the vault. Bianca stiffened. "It's here!" Byron moved to the door, rifle up, eyes scanning the corridor. The Guardian didn't announce itself with roars or stomping feet. It moved like a phantom, silent, efficient, and predatory. The only warning was the slight increase in heat displacement, a subtle shift in the air as it searched for warmth. They ducked into a side room as the sound of scraping claws on metal passed by, slow and methodical. Through the cracked glass of a shattered window, Byron caught a glimpse of it, the same massive creature but now closer, clearer. Its body was armored with layered biometallic scales, and its limbs moved with terrifying precision. It didn't look like something that evolved. It looked like something designed by committee, every inch of it optimized to kill. They held their breath as it paused outside the room. Bianca gently pressed her hand to Byron's chest, steadying his breathing, her fur brushing his jaw. The contact was grounding. Then, without a sound, the Guardian turned and moved on. Once the coast was clear, they continued deeper until they reached a thick, reinforced door, one marked Command Core. Byron approached the control panel, tapping through layers of outdated security protocols. "It's password locked, but I can bypass it." Bianca stepped forward. "Let me try." He moved aside as she placed her palm on the console. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel beeped, lights flickering to green. The door groaned open. He looked at her in surprise. "Biometric access. They programmed us to serve, even now at a base." The command core was intact, rows of consoles curved around a central chair, monitors blinking with sluggish life. The main terminal still glowed with a dim interface, and to Byron's relief, the beacon module was present. He moved fast, plugging in his transmitter, fingers flying across the interface to reroute power. He calibrated the signal, overriding the relay's long-range deadlock. After several tense moments, the system began broadcasting. "Their signal's out, someone's gonna hear it." Bianca stood at the viewport, watching the Guardian stalk the lower level, packing like it sensed something had changed. "They'll come for you," she said, "but if they know I'm here, I won't let them take you." He cut in. "Not again." She turned to him slowly, eyes soft. "Byron, I can't survive without heat, without you. Even if we make it out, I'll never last long on a standard ship. I wasn't built to exist without contact." He stepped closer, voice low. "Then stay close, I'll make it work." She didn't reply immediately. Her gaze held his, and then she reached out, pulling him into a slow, deliberate embrace. Her body was cool again, but not painfully so, her internal balance stabilizing from proximity alone. She pressed her forehead against his, breathing in his warmth. "You're the first person who didn't treat me like a thing. You're not a thing. You're Bianca, and I'm not leaving without you." But before either could say more, the lights flickered again, this time violently. A warning klaxon sounded, echoing through the vault. The Guardian had found the broadcast signal and was racing toward them. Bianca stepped back, her face hardening. "Then we stand together." Byron raised his weapon. "We end this now." The klaxon shrieked through the metal corridors like a dying animal, echoing off the icy walls with a rising urgency that made Byron's pulse spike. Lights above them flickered, casting frantic flashes over Bianca's face as she turned toward the control room's doorway, eyes locked onto the direction of the approaching threat. Her fur bristled with anticipation, and her muscles tensed beneath the snow-white coat as if her body instinctively understood what was coming. Byron stayed beside her, rifle raised, heart pounding with the kind of focus that only came when death was moments away. The air grew denser, thicker with static and heat distortion. The beast was close, and it was no longer stalking. It was charging. The signal beacon pulsed behind them in rhythmic flashes, still active, still broadcasting. If it went down now, all of this would have been for nothing. Bianca moved first, pulling a heavy containment pipe from the wall with a burst of strength and positioning herself near the side of the entryway. Byron took up the opposite angle, crouched and steady, weapon aimed. They had one chance to hit it hard before it entered. If they hesitated even for a second, it would tear through them like tissue. He glanced at her once, just once, and she nodded without words, without drama. That simple nod told him everything he needed to know. They weren't just two survivors anymore. They were partners, bound not by orders or programming, but by choice. The door exploded inward with a metallic scream, shredded open by the Guardian's clawed limbs. It burst through like a machine possessed, moving with horrifying speed despite its size. Byron fired first, a pulse round slamming into the creature's shoulder, sparking off its armored flesh. It barely flinched. Bianca was already moving, swinging the pipe with enough force to dent the wall if it missed. It didn't. The blow struck the beast square in the side of its elongated head, staggering it enough for Byron to empty another burst into the joint beneath its arm. The creature reeled, then roared, not a sound of pain, but of rage. The sound vibrated through the floor, threatening to shake the entire command core loose. It lunged at Bianca, jaws spreading unnaturally wide, and she ducked low, sliding beneath its reach and slamming the pipe into the back of its leg. It dropped to one knee, opening a clear shot. Byron didn't hesitate. He unloaded a focused burst into the creature, exposed back, but the armor was too dense for real damage. The Guardian spun and backhanded him with a sweep of one clawed arm, sending him flying into a control console. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs and fractured the panel behind him, but he stayed conscious, fueled by adrenaline and fury. Bianca bellowed something in her native tongue and threw herself at the beast, tackling it into a nearby support column with a crash that sent sparks raining down around them. Byron groaned, dragging himself up with one arm and gripping his weapon tight. He could see the fight turning against them. The creature was adapting, shifting its body to reduce its heat signature, moving faster with every second. Bianca was holding her own, but even her strength had limits and they were nearing them. He needed a plan fast. His eyes landed on the backup power junction mounted near the ceiling, a fail-safe designed to overload in emergencies. It could deliver a massive thermal discharge if triggered manually, if he could draw the beast close enough. "Bianca," he shouted over the chaos, "get it to the main column." She heard him barely and pivoted mid-grapple, using her legs to shove the Guardian toward the center of the room. The beast resisted, claws raking across her shoulder and sending fur and blood flying, but she didn't slow. She slammed her forehead into its chest, grabbed its arm, and dragged it into position through sheer will. Byron climbed the broken console, forcing himself not to pass out, and yanked the manual override lever from its casing. Sparks flared, and a warning siren screamed as the junction began to glow red hot. Bianca saw the signal, spun away at the last second, and dove behind the central terminal. Byron threw himself off the console just as the overload triggered. The discharge exploded in a wave of heat and kinetic force, filling the room with blinding light and thunder. The Guardian let out a distorted shriek as its adaptive systems failed under the sudden thermal surge. The blast blew out part of the wall and hurled the creature backward into a pile of steel debris. When the light faded, it didn't move. The silence that followed was jagged and hollow, like the room itself was catching its breath. Byron lay flat on his back, ears ringing, staring at the ceiling. For a long moment, he couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. Then Bianca appeared above him, blood running down her fur, eyes wide with worry. She touched his cheek gently, her fingers trembling. "You're warm," she whispered, "still warm." He coughed, laughing despite the pain. "Damn right I am." She helped him sit up, one arm wrapped carefully around his ribs. Together they limped toward the edge of the room and looked back at the Guardian's motionless body. It was still smoking, the metallic sheen of its armor blackened and cracked. One eye flickered once, then went dark. "Is it dead?" he asked. "For now," she said, "but we need to go. Reinforcements could be coming. The beacon will bring someone, but maybe not allies." He nodded, jaw tight. "We need to find a place to hold out until they arrive." She paused, looking uncertain. "There's a secondary chamber near the geothermal pools. It's warmer there, safer for me." "Then that's where we go," he said, reaching for her hand. "We stay together." She laced her fingers through his. "You're not afraid of me." "I've been afraid of a lot of things," he said. "But you never." They made their way slowly through the ruined corridor, leaning on each other with every step, two broken beings who had survived something unforgivable. And despite everything, the blood, the frost, the fight, they held on to the heat between them as if it were life itself. Because it was, the geothermal chamber lay far beneath the original vault, past collapsed corridors and sealed-off labs where the Syndicate had once hidden its secrets beneath layers of frost and stone. It was a natural formation, accidentally discovered, barely documented, and completely abandoned when the Frostborn project was shut down. But Bianca knew the way. She had crawled through these halls in her earliest days, half feral and desperate, learning the shape of her prison. The path was steep, slick with condensation and the soft hiss of escaping steam, but it was navigable, and most importantly, it was safe for now. Byron kept one arm around her waist, steadying her, not because she was weak, but because they had become so attuned to one another that being apart felt wrong. Her wounds were superficial, but exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, and every step she took was slower than the last. Byron's body screamed in protest with each movement, ribs bruised, shoulder aching, vision flickering from the force of the earlier blast, but none of that mattered. They had survived. That was the only thing he cared about. Surviving meant moving forward. As they reached the entrance to the cavern, a wave of warm air rolled over them like breath from a giant's lungs. The ice ended abruptly, giving way to slick black stone and pools of bubbling water that shimmered with faint bioluminescent colors. Steam curled from cracks in the ground, rising into the air and drifting toward the cavern's high ceiling where it vanished into darkness. The geothermal vents kept this place habitable, barely. To Byron, it was sweltering compared to the rest of the moon. To Bianca, it was sanctuary. She collapsed onto a flat stone near the largest pool, breathing heavily as her first steamed from the sudden shift in temperature. Her eyes closed, not from pain, but from relief. Byron sat beside her, careful not to crowd her, and removed the last of his emergency rations from his pack. He handed her a nutrient bar, and she stared at it for a moment before taking it gently from his hand. "I used to dream about food," she said after a few minutes, voice soft. Real food, not nutrient paste, not liquid meals pumped into a feeding line. I used to imagine a hot meal, a table, and someone sitting across from me who wasn't wearing a lab coat or a weapon. Byron leaned back on his hands, staring into the flickering steam. "You'd hate my cooking. I burn everything that isn't already wrapped in foil." She smiled just a little. "Still sounds better than what I had." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the bubbling of the pools and the occasional groan of shifting stone deep beneath them. When they were finished, Bianca stood and peeled off the remnants of her upper armor layer, torn and soaked with blood. Her white fur glistened beneath the heat, her frame lean and powerful, marked by old scars that spoke of years of survival no one should have endured. Byron didn't look away. He didn't ogle her, didn't treat her like a curiosity. He simply watched her like someone, watching something rare and beautiful emerge from the cold. "You're starring," she said, not accusing, just observing. He nodded. "I am." "Does it bother you?" "No," he said honestly. "It amazes me." Bianca turned toward him, stepping close. The heat between them had shifted again, no longer just about temperature, but about presence, about closeness and what it meant. She reached out, fingertips brushing his jaw, her touch cool, but no longer burning. "You really see me?" "I think I've always seen you," he replied, even when I didn't understand what I was looking at. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment the air between them was still. Then she leaned down slowly and kissed him. Her lips were cold, soft, tasting of ice and silence, but the fire that surged through Byron's chest in that instant was real. It wasn't desperate, wasn't frenzied. It was quiet, steady, built from survival and trust and shared pain. When she pulled back, her eyes shone like twin shards of glacier light. "I'm not built for this," she said. Everything about me was designed to serve, to fight, to need. But this isn't programming. He touched her cheek gently. Neither is what I feel for you. She closed her eyes and leaned into his palm. I used to think if I ever made it out, I'd be alone. No one would want something like me. Well, he said, smirking slightly, I've got a thing for snow monsters. She laughed, a real laugh, and it echoed through the cavern, startling a flock of glowing insects from one of the thermal pools. Her joy felt like warmth in itself, and Byron realized how long it had been since he'd heard laughter that didn't carry the weight of sarcasm or pain. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They spent the rest of the night there, curled together on the stone, surrounded by steam and heat and silence that no longer felt like death. For the first time since crashing on this cursed moon, Byron didn't dream of escape or survival. He dreamt of her, of a future where they weren't running, where she wasn't hunted, where he wasn't broken, a place with real air, a sky that wasn't made of ice, and a home that didn't echo with old ghosts. But as the hours passed and the geothermal chamber began to cool, a faint alert flickered on Byron's wrist device. His beacon had received a ping. A ship was coming. The signal wasn't strong enough to confirm identity or allegiance, but it was inbound. Someone had heard the call. He woke Bianca gently, whispering her name. She stirred slowly, eyes blinking open as she adjusted to the dimming light. Someone's coming, he said. We've got a visitor. Could be friend. Could be syndicate. Her face darkened with a mention. If it's syndicate, they'll come for me first. They always do. Then we don't let them, he said. We stay together. She rose to her full height, shaking off sleep with a warrior's grace, and looked up toward the cavern's ceiling. Then we make our stand at the surface, together. Byron nodded, his expression calm but resolute. Let's get moving. And with that, they climbed back toward the cold, toward the unknown, toward whatever fate had decided would meet them at the edge of this frozen world. But this time they weren't just surviving. They were choosing each other, choosing to fight side by side no matter what came next. The climb back toward the upper levels of the vault was slower than before, not because their bodies were weaker, though the bruises, burns, and exhaustion lingered, but because now every step carried more weight. It wasn't just about survival anymore. Byron and Bianca weren't escaping something. They were heading toward it together. The heat of the geothermal pools faded as the cold returned, wrapping its fingers around them with cruel familiarity. Steam vanished, replaced once again by glistening frost and brittle air. Their breath returned to visible clouds. The frost crept over the walls like ivy reclaiming its territory, but this time neither of them flinched at it. They had been tempered, hardened by fire and ice alike. As they emerged from the last tunnel and stepped into the upper atrium, Byron paused to check the signal on his wrist device. It was clearer now, stronger. A vessel was in low orbit, not syndicate military, at least not from the frequency codes. It was registered as a private salvage hauler, the Phelan. He frowned, running through the names he remembered from past contracts. It wasn't familiar. That didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. Independent crews were unpredictable, often loyal to the highest bidder. Syndicate credits went far in the black market salvage world. He showed Bianca the data. Ship's real, civilian registry, but anyone can fake that. Bianca read the display carefully, her glowing eyes scanning each code. They'll come in fast if they think there's a claim to be made. This moon's not on any official map, but a salvage crew would know how to track anomalous distress signals. They won't expect survivors, and if they see me. Byron nodded grimly. We don't let them see you, not at first. I'll handle the contact. You stay close, hidden. I'm not afraid of them, she said, voice steady. I know, but I've been around their kind. Greedy, curious. The worst kind of threat is the one that smiles while it's aiming a scanner at your back. Bianca didn't argue. She followed him through the fractured corridors, past the body of the Guardian, now cold and stiff, already partially reclaimed by the ice, and toward the old landing pad at the surface. The airlock groaned open at their approach, forced by Byron's patched override from the core. The outside world greeted them with a vicious wind, biting and loud, sweeping across a cracked and cratered tundra under a swirling sky of clouds and auroras. The sun here never rose, not properly, but its dim light pushed faint colors across the horizon. They stood together in the shadows of the ruined outpost, watching as a speck of light descended from the heavens and grew into a vessel. The Phthalon was old, patched with mismatched hull plating and noisy retro thrusters, but it was armed. Byron could see the belly guns and turret mounts, not military grade, but enough to intimidate a crew of scavengers or fend off wildlife. It hovered low for a moment before landing, kicking up a cloud of snow and vapor. The ramp extended with a mechanical whine. 3 figures descended, 2 human, 1 a tall humanoid in a reinforced exosuit. Byron kept his rifle lowered but ready. He stepped forward into the open while Bianca hung back in the shadows near a broken cargo crate. The leader of the trio, a short, sharp-eyed woman with a shaved scalp and a scar running from jaw to neck, lifted a hand. "Signal came from this wreck. You the one who sent it?" Byron gave a nod. "Yeah, Byron Maddox. Ship went down during a courier run. I've got black box data, core samples, and syndicate research files. The whole vault down there still active. You interested?" The woman squinted at him, then gestured to the man beside her, a lanky tech specialist already pulling out a scanner. "Depends. We pick up some wild heat signatures, something unnatural. What else is down there?" Byron didn't flinch. The vault was housing experimental biotech. Most of it's dead. The place is unstable, probably won't survive another season of frost shifts. "Convenience," she muttered. "You alone." He hesitated just enough for her to catch it mostly. That was all she needed. Her gaze shifted and she signaled the exosuited figure, who immediately turned and swept the area with a thermal scanner. The device beeped once, then again louder. Byron cursed and moved quickly. "She's not a threat," he barked, raising both hands. "She's not syndicate. She was one of their prisoners." But it was too late. The suit's occupant pivoted and raised its weapon just as Bianca stepped into view, her eyes glowing and posture tense. The scanner whined sharply as it read her body's unique energy signature. The crew's weapons rose in unison. "She's not human," the leader snapped. "What is that thing?" "I said she's not a threat," Byron repeated, stepping in front of Bianca without hesitation. "She's with me. She saved my life. We took down the Guardian together." The tension escalated fast. Fingers hovered over triggers. The tech read something from his scanner and looked alarmed, her body's cycling heat like a reactor. "That's not natural. She's a weapon." Bianca stayed still, her hands open. She didn't snarl, didn't attack. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to make the crew uncomfortable. Byron took a deep breath and locked eyes with the leader. "You want the vault? The data. You want to pick the bones of a syndicate experiment. Fine, but she comes with me. You don't get a say in that." "She's property," the woman spat. "Syndicate prints are all over her design. You think the moment someone sees her, they won't track her back to whoever pulled her from the ice. You're walking around with a bounty target and don't even know it." "I know," he said. "I don't care." The woman sneered. "Then you're a fool." Byron stepped closer. "No, I'm the one holding the data you want. And if you so much as twitch wrong, I'll bury every file and take it with me into the snow. You'll leave here with nothing." The crew hesitated. The tech looked uncertain. The exosuit didn't move. Finally, the woman exhaled sharply and waved them down. "Fine," she said. "We'll take you both, but you ride separate until we figure out who you're dragging on board." Byron didn't thank her. He just turned to Bianca and nodded. She stepped forward, and though her expression was unreadable, her body remained relaxed. She didn't trust them. Neither did he, but they had what they needed, a way off this frozen hell and a shot at something more. As they boarded the ship, Byron sat beside her and leaned in clothes. "We're not done fighting. You know that, right?" She nodded slowly. "I don't mind." As long as we fight together. And when the Thalon lifted from the ice, leaving the shattered vault behind, the sky above them shimmered with cold light. But within the ship, heat pulsed between them, steady and sure. Not just warmth of body, but something deeper, something real. The Thalon was no luxury vessel. It smelled faintly of engine coolant and recycled air, and its hallways were narrow and lit by dim overhead strips that buzzed at irregular intervals. The crew operated with the twitchy precision of people used to salvaging wrecks from war zones, always half expecting an explosion or betrayal. Byron had seen their type before, had even run with crews like them in younger years. He recognized the way they eyed every piece of tech like it had a price tag floating over it. Their interest in him had faded fast once they learned he wasn't carrying high-end syndicate hardware, but their attention toward Bianca hadn't wavered. Not once. She felt it too. He could see the stiffness in her posture, the way she kept her back to walls, always near an exit or a vent. Her glowing blue eyes never stopped moving, scanning every angle. She didn't speak to the crew. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. Byron stayed close, always positioning himself between her and the others without making a show of it. He was careful not to escalate tensions, but he didn't soften either. They were being tolerated, not welcomed. The ship's captain, Captain Jessica Karn, had made that clear when she gave them their temporary quarters. A storage compartment cleared of crates and fitted with 2 sleeping pads. No locks on the doors, no privacy, just a message, behave, or you'll both be spaced. Byron didn't blame her. Salvagers had little loyalty to anything except their next payday, and if syndicate trackers came sniffing around, Bianca was worth far more dead than alive. Still, there was one small mercy. The ship's thermal control system was adaptable. Byron rerouted heat from the engine ducts into their compartment, creating a zone Bianca could tolerate. The recycled warmth wasn't perfect, but it kept her stable, her fur losing that brittle edge, her trembling gone. She pressed her back to the warm panel and exhaled deeply, eyes closing for the first time in hours. "They think I'm a bomb," she murmured. "You're worse," Byron said, kneeling beside her with a faint smile. "You're a mystery. People hate what they can't understand." She opened her eyes, studying him. "And you do?" He shook his head. "No, I hate cowards. You're not one of them." She shifted closer, resting her hand lightly on his forearm. "You should have left me. You had your chance. You could have gone home." "Home?" He gave a humorless chuckle. "I haven't had a home since I left Earth. Just ships and stations and people pretending not to be alone." Her grip on his arm tightened. "Then make your home here with me." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he moved in and kissed her, not the desperate kiss of their geothermal shelter, but something steadier, deeper. Her lips were cold as ever, but her body pressed into his with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. When they pulled apart, her eyes glowed a little brighter, and for the first time since boarding the Thalon, she smiled without pain behind it. They stayed like that for a long time, curled beside the warm panel, letting the silence settle. It wasn't until the intercom buzzed that the tension returned. Byron rose and hit the switch. Captain Karn's voice came through, clipped and terse. "Byron gets to the forward hold now." He didn't like the tone. Something had shifted. He motioned for Bianca to stay back and grabbed his weapon before heading out. When he arrived, the hold was crowded with gear and crates, but Karn was front and center, flanked by her tech specialist and the exosuit operator. She tossed a data slate at him without preamble. He caught it and scanned the report, and felt his blood run cold. "They pinged your beacon transmission," she said flatly. "Syndicates flagged the signal. Their claim record traces it to an active black site. Your frozen girlfriend's officially listed as property under Project Thermes." Byron looked up, jaw tight. "You planning to sell her?" "I'm planning to survive, and so are you if you've got a shred of sense. The syndicate doesn't make polite offers. If we don't hand her over, they'll come with a gunship and tear us apart for harboring stolen assets." "She's not stolen," he snapped. "She's alive. She's not a damn crate of weapons-grade scrap." Karn's expression didn't change. "That doesn't matter. What matters is they'll come, fast and hot. The tech added nervously, "We've got maybe 8 hours before their scout signal breaches orbit. Then it's over." Byron's mind raced. Options were limited. The Thalen wasn't equipped for a dogfight, and they had no allies nearby. He could feel the others watching him, waiting for a decision that would either doom them or save them. Finally, he spoke. "Jettison us." Karn blinked. "Excuse me, take one of your shuttles. Give me a pod. We'll drop. You go dark, change course, head for an unlisted port. If the Syndicate comes, they'll only see a signal leading to an empty hold. They won't find her." Karn hesitated. "That's a death sentence." "I've survived worse," Byron said. "And what about her? She can't live without." "She'll have me." There was silence, a long, sharp pause where everyone weighed the insanity of it. Then slowly Karn nodded. "You've got 4 hours. After that, I'm gone, with or without you." Back in their compartment, Byron relayed the plan. Bianca didn't argue. She just nodded once and began preparing. Her loyalty wasn't the blind obedience of programming. It was choice, raw and honest. She would follow him, not because she had to, but because he had proven himself worthy of that trust. They loaded into the shuttle quietly, just the two of them with barely enough supplies to last a week. As the pod detached and began its descent toward a nearby ice moon, smaller, colder, but uninhabited, Byron sat beside her and adjusted the heat core embedded in the wall. The pod would be tight, uncomfortable, but survivable. "We'll be ghosts," he said. "They won't find us if we stay low." And when they stopped looking, she asked. He looked at her, his voice calm. "Then we build something new." The stars outside the viewport blurred as the pod hit atmosphere. Bianca leaned her head against his shoulder, her breath steady. Byron reached out and took her hand, and together they braced for the impact, not of the landing, but of the life they were choosing. One not written by Syndicate scientists, one not defined by fear, one where love, once buried in frost, was finally beginning to thaw. The impact was hard enough to rattle Byron's bones, but the pod held. Metal screamed against ice as the shuttle carved a trench across the moon's frozen surface, the emergency retro thrusters struggling to slow the descent. The internal lights flickered, then stabilized. Steam hissed from the vents as the atmosphere regulators kicked in. They were alive, and more importantly, the pod was intact. He looked across at Bianca, who was already unclipping her restraints, her body moving with practiced calm. Her glowing eyes met his, and she offered a slow, steady nod. No panic, no doubt, just focus. Byron leaned forward and activated the outer sensors. The readouts confirmed what he'd hoped. No immediate pursuit signals, no Syndicate scans sweeping the area. For now, they were invisible, buried under a veil of snow and atmospheric interference. The pod's internal systems were drawing heat from the compact reactor core, enough to keep them both stable. The artificial warmth filled the cramped chamber, and already condensation was forming along the ceiling panels. He wiped a sleeve across Horn for survival. No wasted energy, no hesitation. But there was more to it. Lac glaciers stretched into the horizon, untouched and lifeless. A perfect place to disappear. Bianca stood and moved to the back wall, checking the emergency packs and filtration systems. Byron watched her in silence for a moment. Even now, in the dim flicker of backup lights, she moved like someone born for survival. No wasted energy, no hesitation. But there was more to it now. She wasn't just functioning, she was present. Her movements had purpose, and that purpose was no longer simply staying alive, it was staying with him. "Heat core stable," she said without turning. "We can hold out here for days if needed, maybe longer if we ration power." Byron nodded. "Won't need that long. Karn's crew will reroute Syndicate attention away from us. They'll sweep the wrong moon, follow a ghost trail." Bianca looked over her shoulder and after. He moved toward her, resting a hand on the pod's support beam. "We wait, just until we're sure they've moved on. Then we find something new, a place where no one's looking to buy or sell us." She stepped closer, her presence filling the small space with calm heat. "There's no world like that, Byron. Not for me." "There will be," he said. "I'll find it or build it." Her eyes softened. For someone engineered, someone who'd spent so much of her life treated like a project, a tool, a mistake, he could see how deeply those words struck. He wasn't making promises for effect. He wasn't playing hero. He was speaking truth, the kind that settles deep and doesn't need repeating. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath the fabric. "You're the first person who's ever looked at me and didn't see a threat or a failure. You saw someone worth saving." He placed his hand over hers. "You were never the one who needed saving. I was." They stayed like that for a while, the hum of the reactor core the only sound between them. The pod was small, but it was warm, and it was theirs. Outside, the storm howled wind against hull, ice shifting across the landscape, but in here there was peace. Not comfort, not luxury, but something real. Later, Byron rigged the pod's small antenna to emit low-frequency scans. Not enough to draw attention, but just enough to map the terrain and locate any natural caves or structures they could move into if the pod lost power. He didn't like the idea of staying still for long. Movement kept predators confused. That rule applied to syndicate agents just as much as wildlife. As the day, if it could be called that, war on the cold outside intensified. The moon's atmosphere thickened with drifting ice particles, making visibility difficult. The pod began to strain under the temperature drop. The walls creaked. Bianca lay beside him, her body pressed close, the curve of her back resting against his chest. Her long limbs folded neatly to conserve space. Even in rest, she was elegant, controlled. He could feel the slow rise and fall of her breath against him. It grounded him in a way nothing else could. His thoughts drifted. He thought of his old life, his ship, the aimless jobs, the empty alliances. None of it had mattered, not until he'd stumbled into that frozen vault and found her, alone, half-frozen, clinging to life. She had been designed to bond, to cling for heat and depend on others, but it was never desperation. It was instinct, intimacy carved into her biology. What the syndicate failed to understand was that true connection couldn't be forced. She had bonded with him not because she was built that way, but because he had met her not with fear or exploitation, but with honesty. And she had chosen him in return. She stirred, blinking slowly. "I dreamed again." He shifted, brushing a hand gently through her thick white fur. "What about?" "I was in the vault, but it wasn't cold. The walls were green, growing, covered in vines. There were others like me, but they weren't afraid anymore. They were free." He smiled faintly. Sounds like somewhere worth finding. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable but intent. "We could make it real, not just run, not just hide, but actually find others like me, help them. You think there are more. There were at least 9 pods still sealed when I last checked. I don't know if they survived, but if they did, they're out there. Scattered, alone, maybe scared, maybe angry." Byron thought about it. The logical part of his mind screamed that it was a terrible idea, tracking down rogue syndicate experiments, fighting whatever other monsters they might have left behind. But another part, the part that had held Bianca through the worst nights and kissed her beneath the heat vents of a dying world, knew there was no other future that would mean anything. This wasn't just about escape, it was about purpose. "Then when we move," he said, "we don't just go looking for safety, we go looking for them." Bianca nodded. "They'll be afraid of you." He smiled, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "Then I'll do what I did with you. Stay close. Stay warm." They lay together again in silence, the soft thumb of the pod, a quiet heartbeat beneath them. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, hope took root, not the fragile kind that crumbles under pressure, but the stubborn, defiant kind that burns even in the coldest places. The universe didn't make space for people like them, so they would carve their own. The pod systems began to fail exactly 9 days after landing. The reactor core could no longer keep up with the encroaching cold, and the heat regulations slipped degree by degree until frost returned to the walls. Byron knew it was coming. He'd been watching the readouts for days, stretching their energy reserves as far as they would go. He didn't tell Bianca at first, she already knew. She could feel the difference in the air, the tightening bite of the cold, the sharpness in her breath, but neither of them panicked. They had already decided they wouldn't die inside a box, buried on some nameless ice moon. If the pod failed, they would leave it. They would keep moving, and they would do it together. On the 10th morning, the final thermal coil gave out. The last pocket of warmth flickered away, and the pod dimmed with a soft whine. Byron rose, layered in everything they had, and helped Bianca into her armored coat, more patchwork now than functional. Her fur bristled as she adjusted to the dropping temperature, but she didn't tremble. She didn't lean on him. She stood on her own, radiant and ready. They exited the pod into a world swallowed in white. The storm had calmed but left behind a wasteland of untouched snow stretching in every direction, broken only by jutting ice shelves and the glow of distant thermal fissures. Byron activated the beacon module they'd salvaged from the wreck, reprogrammed short range, just powerful enough to bounce a signal if someone happened to be passing by. Not a distress call, just a mark in the void. A flag that said, "We're still here." For the next 2 days they walked. At first it was cautious, step by step, conserving heat and checking their bearings, but by the 3rd day they moved faster, stronger, having adapted to the rhythm of survival. Bianca had scouted a crater on the edge of the map, one she remembered seeing from the pod's scans. It showed geological heat activity. It meant possibility, and possibility was all they needed. By the time they reached the crater's ridge, the storm had returned, but not with the same ferocity. It was a curtain now, thin snow drifting across the wind, gentle but blinding. At the base of the crater lay a shallow cave, barely large enough for shelter, but it radiated warmth. Not enough to live in forever, but enough to survive long enough for the next move. They settled inside exhausted bodies pressed close under thermal blankets, with a makeshift coil rig heating the stone beneath them. For the first time in days, they spoke not about danger or syndicate threats or heat reserves. They spoke about after. "I don't want to hide anymore," Bianca said, her head resting against his chest, her voice low and calm. "I want to find them, the others, not for revenge, not even for justice, just so they know they weren't made to die alone." Byron ran his fingers through the fur at her neck, gentle and slow. "And when we find them, then what? Then we make a place for us, a place no one else controls, a home that's warm because we made it that way." He closed his eyes and let those words settle deep. After all the years of wandering, of scraping for meaning in a galaxy that only ever offered contracts and betrayals, he had never once believed in the idea of home, but now he did, because home wasn't a place. It was a decision. It was her. The next morning, the sky opened. Byron stepped out of the cave and looked up, blinking against the glare. For the first time since they landed, the clouds had parted, revealing a pale blue sky lit by the distant star their moon circled. The light reflected off the ice in crystalline bursts. It was still cold, still dangerous, but beautiful in a way he hadn't expected, and then he heard the hum. It was faint, distant, and mechanical. He turned, eyes narrowing, and saw it just on the horizon. A ship, small, sleek, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife through frost. Not syndicate, too elegant, no weapons bristling from its hull. A courier maybe, or a long-range scout. Byron waved his hand over the transmitter, boosting the signal. The ship altered course. Bianca stepped beside him, her face calm but her eyes bright. "They're coming." He looked at her. "You sure you're ready to trust someone else again?" "I don't have to trust them," she said, taking his hand. "I trust you." The ship landed with care, its engines pushing aside snow as the ramp lowered, and a single figure stepped out, unarmed, wrapped in diplomatic robes, visor down. They approached slowly, respectfully, stopping just outside the crater. "I received your signal," the figure said through a modulated voice. "You're survivors." Byron didn't answer right away. He looked at Bianca. She nodded. "Not just survivors," Byron said. "We're building something new." The figure tilted their head. Do you require extraction? Yes, Bianca replied, but not to be taken to be transported to where we can begin again. The stranger didn't argue. They simply extended a hand, and after a long pause, Byron and Bianca stepped forward together. They boarded the ship not as fugitives or cargo, but as two beings who had earned the right to choose their future. As the ramp sealed and the ship lifted into the sky, Bianca sat beside him in the passenger bay, her hand wrapped in his. Her body leaned into him not out of desperation, but because it was right. He turned to her, brushing a strand of white hair from her face, and she looked back with the kind of love that no experiment could manufacture. He kissed her once more, slow, sure, unafraid. When they broke apart, she smiled. Warm enough, she teased. He grinned, always with you. And as the stars opened before them, the cold was left behind. Not just the frost and the storms, but the loneliness, the pain, the past. What remained was something forged in fire and ice, in choices made freely and promises kept. They didn't need a destination anymore. They had each other, and that was enough.